quiet back there. Got it. Okay, cool. Okay, all right, I think we're there.
Good evening and welcome to the Clan Podcast. Tonight, I'm your host, Manny White Eagle. Sitting alongside me is my co-host, Miko Sampson. All the way across the nation, we have with us Maya Rose Dittloff, the screenwriter, filmmaker, and director with us here tonight. The screenwriter for AMC's especially new series, Dark Winds. At that.
There's that.
How are you tonight there, Maya?
Oh, I am well. Thank you guys for that kind introduction. I'm super excited to be able to chat with you guys here. Hopefully give you guys some insider information perhaps. But yeah, very happy to be joining you, Manny and Miko.
Absolutely. We're glad to have you here. So what got you specifically started in the screenwriting or into the film scene as a whole, if you will?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I can take you guys way back. So I'm I'm Blackfeet Mandan Hidatsa. I grew up in Montana, a little bit of Wyoming, a little bit of Colorado. So all along the Rocky Mountain front. But really kind of my core memories of childhood are all kind of up on the Blackfeet Nation and the land my family got in allotment directly outside of Glacier National Park. So my first intro to storytelling was literally sitting around a campfire, my aunties and uncles all telling ghost stories. So I think everything that I write, everything that I do is trying to kind of capture that same feeling. And of course, in Native communities, we all understand that kind of coming together and just sharing stories over a fire is something so, innate in us all really also, feeling comfortable but scared, at home, but on the edge of your seat. So that was kind of my first intro to stories. But I grew up wanting to be a book editor. So I was constantly reading, but I was also in theater. I was also always watching movies. I've got two younger siblings, so that's very much kind of what our family did. We watched a lot of movies, a lot of TV shows. And at some point I just said, you know what, I can combine all my interests, all of these things that I love. And thankfully, because I'd read so much, I'd given myself a very apt education on storytelling.
What was one of your favorite books to read as a youth, or what got you started into like the deeper stories, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, I can't, this is like the cheesy answer, but I can't imagine my life without it. Very much kind of came up as a part of the Harry Potter generation. So I think that, at the same time, getting to see Harry, who was struggling with these traumatic things in his life, spoke to me as like a young kid, and having it not define him. And look, it's also a magical world where things can be fun. So I think, as a kid, that's definitely kind of what made me become obsessed.
Become obsessed. That's very cool. Is there anything from your youth that was, because I think this is something that a lot of us run into as Indigenous peoples, is that there wasn't a lot of idols or stories or things or heroes or heroines for us to look up to. Was there anything that, amidst the muddle that caught your eye, that was something that was inspiring or that you gravitated towards?
Yeah, I mean, of course, first and foremost, like my family, I think, of course, seeing, how everyone was able to survive, but then also, particularly, my aunties keeping it together, moving that family forward, in terms of kind of the greater culture as a whole, as you guys know, for so long, up until, the past couple of years, even, there was just absolutely no good Indigenous representation on screen.
Right.
It was always stuck in the past. It was always stereotypes. As a Native woman, it was always extremely harmful towards Native women as well. So I think that there's a disconnect between what I was seeing in my real life and like the strength of Native women, but then also outsiders telling stories about Native people and just wholly getting it wrong.
Right.
I can imagine that happens quite a bit, especially when you think about, for me, one thing that I understand, especially when you talk about the whole process of telling a story, and from its origin, when you think about just telling a story, this oral tradition, right, to the moment when you put it on paper, you're defining it in a new way, in a new dimension. But even also thereafter, putting actors to it, putting action to it, it starts giving it more levels. You start to really have a really, really detailed story about what it is you're talking about. Is there something that you were inspired by? I think, we all find ways that we can express ourselves, but was there anything in particular that got you out of your comfort zone to be able to tell a story about yourself, perhaps, or maybe one that you felt more aligned with in your time?
Yeah. I'm uncertain on kind of like stories that propelled me and told me I could do it, but I think in a way that kind of made me work harder. Because of course, on Dark Winds, one of our executive producers was Chris Eyre. Of course, we've got Smoke Signals, that kind of was like a boom and like an aha moment. Like, oh look, we're funny. Like I think that's of course like we all know that, understand that, and I outside very much just wanted to work to get it right, to celebrate the so many different ways there are to be Native, growing up on the res, growing up in a city, also like the journey of like reclamation. Of course, we've all had like so much taken from us, but I think kind of being able to celebrate those like old ancestral ways of knowing and being and surviving also is something that's so beautiful, and something that I know is just so important, and I think that we don't get a lot of that in kind of mainstream media, so something I definitely try to work for in my work.
Right on.
Oh wow! So, is there a specifically like favorite film that you ever made? I know you made quite a few here, and I've read some of that took like a lot of funding, of your own personal funding, if you will, as well.
Yeah. So last year after the writer's room on Dark Winds, I took my hard-earned TV money and immediately turned around and spent it. And that was on a short film called Dogwood, which was set on the Blackfeet Nation. We shot it entirely on the Blackfeet Nation, and is a matriarch-led Indigenous revenge story with a dash of magical realism. There's a ghost at the end, and so I think it was, I love getting to dabble in specifically magical realism. I think so much of like our old stories and what keeps us alive, to outsiders there isn't sometimes a lot of logic to those stories, but I think when you grow up in the culture, and you could point to any number of like trickster stories, Blackfeet Nation, we've got Napi stories, that I think magical realism is a real door in for me also. But yeah, Dogwood, did spend a fair amount of money, but was kind of a great opportunity to write, produce, and direct a short film. Flew a bunch of actors out to the Blackfeet Nation. We shot part of the film out on, that land my family got back in allotment. So it was really kind of like a full circle moment for me, and it was something so beautiful because when you're on set, you really do kind of build a family. And I think it's just so important in all ways, in all avenues of life, to be building community. And I think that's something that's happening right now. It's so beautiful to see in film and television also.
I noticed that your style of directing, that you said the word family, that you kind of base your style of directing on that versus some productions you've been on where they don't treat you like that. And you said you've been poorly directed as well on some of those occasions as well. But the way that you kind of, so taking the poorly directed, you've been able to better direct yourself, right, in the productions that you make.
Yeah.
Would that say improved your career, if you will, or?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up doing theater and just like, small local community theater. But that's how I found a lot of, my, community and people kind of, outside my family, outside my tribe. And I think it was, at times, that's hard because you'll get white directors that like don't get it. And I guess I'll say that I have somewhat like an adversarial reaction to some types of authority figures, like if it's not collaborative, if it's not, hey, can I change this, or this feels better to me, then I've got like a natural knee-jerk reaction to kind of like, oh, you're trying to impose what you think on me. And so I kick back in that way. So I've definitely had directors where like, no, this is how you have to do it. And I can remember doing one of Juliet's monologues from Romeo and Juliet in like a high school theater class. And for anyone listening, don't do this, but like I literally was like yelling at my like director because he was like, you've got to say it this way, you've got to do it this way. And I was like so frustrated, I was like close to tears. And so, as a director, I absolutely never want anyone to feel remotely like that. I always think it's my job to just set the tone, set the stage, steer the ship, but also give actors room to play, because that's what's fun at the end of the day is, bouncing ideas off of folks. And everyone brings something unique to the project. And so wanting to be able to like celebrate that and include that, definitely.
I think that's really cool. You definitely point out something that I really like is that oftentimes some of the best film and video, television, all that comes out of pure spontaneity. Just in the moment, people move in a certain direction and they go with something and it just spurs and it keeps on going. And so sometimes that's the moment we see in the final cut. And I think that's so cool. Also, yeah, you definitely touch on a huge point that there's sometimes a huge disconnect between the directors and the writers, even, and then even also directly thereafter to the actors. And so there's a certain level of communication and respect that you approach things with that I completely admire, because this is something that, as you said, even for your experiences, you learn these things through other experiences and how not to be, certainly, but also in ways that you can see yourself the way you would prefer to be, the way you would like to carry yourself in a good way. Being mindful in its entirety. Oh my gosh, I just disappeared.
This guy.
Yeah, so one of the things that I thought was so cool is that along with not only yourself, but also the number of other actors and directors and writers in film and Hollywood and television, along with us comes, these other individuals that we work with. So we are not standalone. We do not take all the glory for ourselves. And certainly, your cast, your actors, your crew, of course, all crew, and even your host, your family, your allotment that you receive from the government and such like that. Use what you got, use your community, be a part of something bigger. And of course, when you guys collaborate and work together, you guys can see yourself in a much brighter future. You definitely exemplify that very, very well. So thank you for what you've done thus far. My question, I think I'm curious as to what it was you were up to in high school just before you started your collegiate career, and also pursuing more further, storytelling, writing, and film even. So where were you in high school? What was high school like for you?
Yeah. Oh, I definitely was a theater person. Had I, been able to meet you guys in the studio, one of the first things you notice, I have like a very quiet voice. I am not a loud director. I can't physically, I don't have the ability to scream. So
You
very,
no.
yeah, I can't do that. So I figured out that theater acting was not for me. So I moved behind the stage. I did a lot of stage managing. And this is all, again, just like in local theater or like in my actual high school. And then eventually tried my hand at writing, tried my hand at directing, was able to direct a one-act play that we brought to like the Montanan Thespian Festival. And I think that was kind of the first time I was able to kind of use those skills, because I had started acting when I was like 5 years old. So it's something that was always with me, but I never felt quite right as an actor. And so, again, in the same way that I grew up reading books, was also just an education on, how to carry yourself in like a community of performers, how that works, how it feels to give notes, how it feels to receive notes. And wanting to do that all in a good way, definitely, because you'll get some folks that have the right intentions but don't necessarily relate information in a good way. And so wanted to make sure that everyone feels right on the same page, because at the end of the day, directing is just communication, having a vision, and like being a good person. But yeah, I think one of the other things I kind of wanted to mention before we move on from the short film, to anyone listening, definitely kind of your community is your most important asset. Your tribe, your family. Part of the reason on set we became such a family was because my family was actually my crew.
Mm.
So on that short film, if you watch the credits, anyone with the last name Belcourt or Dittloff is, directly related to me. And my grandma was literally the one, making our food every day. My mom was like our transportation captain and like driving our little bus around. So definitely, it doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be big. There's so many stories out there that, deserve and need to be told.
As a young Indigenous woman filmmaker, did you ever notice any hardships coming up? And, thanks to you and making more films and projects more in the mainstream, we now have, our people on film and cinema on a more frequent level. But did you ever notice, like, when you were like making that path, any specific hardships?
Yeah, I mean, of course, most of film and television operates out of Los Angeles. I am not from California. So that as a very natural obstacle. And, of course, there requires a lot of money to make a short film. Even then mentioning like most of my crew was my family and I didn't have to pay them. It was still so much money. So those are kind of two obstacles, but I think something that's not talked about enough, oh, sorry, that's the dog, is definitely the idea that it can be lonely. I think that, there's on the day as a writer, it's just me and a computer, and I could be in a room. I could be by myself all day, literally. So your community is kind of your best like asset again, but you really have to go out of your way sometimes to find that, and that takes a while, and that can be really hard for folks just starting out and can definitely be a hardship.
Right. I think I understand what you mean. Myself personally, I grew up in the Los Angeles area as well. And that's one of the things that you definitely find almost immediately is you find people that have the common interest or the same backgrounds, and definitely you feel just naturally at home with them. You feel comfortable. You feel like you can be yourself around them. And I think that definitely helps to alleviate all the stresses of the life there. Me just driving around is stressful, let alone just trying to survive and the cost of living and all those things. Yeah, I think you touch on quite a few good points, especially in the sense that we don't necessarily think about all of these things when we have these endeavors and dreams necessarily. But to that note, I think you're doing very well as far as being able to spearhead that, to take it head on and be able to not shy away from the opportunity, literally. And so I think that's really amazing, and you're doing really well. How is it that you came about to get to LA? You come from Montana, you're from the Rockies, right? You're from the mountains. How is it being so close to the beach for you?
Yeah. I went to UCLA for film school, and then I did a stint for my MFA at the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe. But ended up in Los Angeles. I think from the moment I made the decision, I'm gonna do this, I knew that I was full in. I knew that and to this day, if I could do anything else, I would, because it's not an easy life. Everything is high stakes. But I knew that I'd have to live in Los Angeles, and it's just where the magic happens, so to speak. And I think the first time I came to LA was kind of a lot of it felt so alien. I'd never seen so many cars, I'd never been around so many people in my life. It's fully a different world. But when I looked up on the street, every single billboard was for a movie or a TV show. And that single thing is something that I held on to. And I was like, oh, great. And it was great last year with, season 1 of Reservation Dogs coming out. Down my street, like our bus stop was a poster for Reservation Dogs. And I was like, oh, this is like so amazing, and such a testament to like how far we've come also, and such a great team, and so many leaders kind of on that cast and crew. So it's great to have comedy, drama, all types of stories starting to get told, and it's just the beginning, which is great.
For sure.
So over the past 2 years, we kind of had to adapt to a different way of life, given like the current situation at hand. How would that situation affect your career throughout the past 2 years? Did you notice any differences or?
Yeah. I mean, as an emerging, writer and director, I'll say it didn't necessarily, I think I had a little different than most folks. I didn't have an office job. I during quarantine, during lockdown, which Los Angeles took very seriously, I could just sit down and write. And then, when it was I the summer of 2020, I shot a short documentary that's, still being edited, that's about my family, the folks that I was literally quarantining with. So I think it just made me change the outlook of which I take the trajectory of my career, but also the semantics on kind of how to make it happen. I said, okay, like I've got a computer, I've got Wi-Fi, let's write as much as possible. So sat down and that's what I did. And thankfully that's kind of how I was able to get, on the map, any sort of map. It was just continually looking for opportunities and being prepared. So, knocking on doors and getting lucky, definitely, but always being like, hey, I've got this script. Do you want to read it? Whenever anyone asked. So, I definitely took that time to just prepare, write as much as possible, and try and get the craft of it down as much as I could.
All right. Wow. So did you have any future projects coming up for the years ahead, or?
Oh, I have so many. Yeah, I mean, I've got projects in TV, in feature films. I've got things that are original ideas. I've got things that are adaptations, everything from kind of YA books. But I can faithfully say each of those projects is led by an Indigenous character, which is so amazing, so exciting. And I'm thinking they might even all they are all also like female led also. So truly like a celebration of like Native women also, which is so exciting. Yeah, I wish I could give you more details. But most of them I've been strictly told not to tell people about. But I think on a fun announcement, this year, one of my feature film scripts, which is a psychological thriller / horror, was chosen for the Indigenous list, which is a collaboration between the Blacklist, Sundance, and Illuminative. So was super happy to kind of have this original idea that is a ghost story, and was kind of, in all ways, again, trying to recapture, the spooky stories of like my youth and growing up. Trying to, get that made would be absolutely amazing, and is the absolute dream to kind of be able to write and direct a feature film. So fingers crossed is what I'll say. And yeah, that's the one I can talk about, but also one I love very deeply.
Right. I think that's very cool. I definitely love the anticipation moments, because like you're saying, you don't get to talk about it with anybody, and it's just like having a secret that like it's so golden, it's so awesome. Anyways, I think it's so cool that you definitely went from, as you mentioned, taking opportunities as they came along. In 2019, you applied and were an awardee for the LA Skins Fest, which helps you write and kind of piece together where you're building up to now. And even to me, what I see is, along with most writers, is a lot of these stories are connected. And to me, it's just kind of leading into what you're kind of working with now. And I think that's so cool. A lot of the subject matter or the topics, or I guess, I don't know how you would categorize the genres of these films, because a lot of them to me come from nonfiction. They come from real stories, they come from real origins. And as you mentioned, just because it has a ghost or something a little bit fantastical, we have to put it into this fictions category. But is there something that you would like to explore a little bit more, as far as something into, you mentioned the horror and the fantastical, but as far as a lot of the dramas and things, would you be curious about trying things into the comedy realm, or more sitcom?
I wish I could write comedy. I like to think that, in person and interpersonally, I'm not a funny person. But like writing it is like, oh my gosh, I forget every joke I've ever heard or been told, and I'm like, I don't know how to do that. I wish I could write comedy. But the way I kind of explain what I write and what genre I write in is I'll always be, a drama writer, but I like a little bit of a twist of something. So of course, a little bit of horror, a little bit of magical realism. Would love to do fantasy, would love to do speculative fiction. And I would love at some point to be able to do like Indigenous futurism. I think that that's such a exciting field. And like we have all the answers. Like everyone else should be like listening to us. We've survived for so long, have such a deep connection to the land. And as we move forward into the future, that knowledge is only going to become more and more valuable. And I think about that all the time. Yeah, would love to write, Indigenous futurism, definitely.
Very good. So I just want to briefly talk about something a little bit more closer to the heart, especially when you talk about, like you said, a lot of these things deal with some very serious subject matter, close to your person, close to your family, close to literally all of us, especially when you talk about the violence and things that happen against our Indigenous people, specifically our women, but also not excluding our males and our young children. So I think that's something that is very hard to deal with. I think you approach it in a very, very mindful way, meaning that you aren't just telling, shock and awe, type of stories just to try to get the attention, but so much as you are also showing and shining a light on the struggle part of it, meaning the triumph, meaning the victorious parts of this, that we overcome this, that we are on the other side of it eventually. And so it's a little bit, like I said, it's hard to talk about these things, but you do it in such a very skillful manner, especially with your writing. Even as you're sitting here with us right now, you have a very, very eloquent choice of words and way of wording things. And so I think that's done very well throughout your films and also your writing. Also even collaboratively, with when you talk about Dark Winds, you have other artists that are also, writers as well, that are collaborating and putting input. And it's something that is very hard to do, to tell the story, like you're saying, even just from a very deep perspective. And so that's something that I wanted to mention, is that while these are stories about women, while these are things that happen to women, it is also things that happen in the world of our men as well. And it is a responsibility for us as gentlemen, as caretakers, as beings, as fellow existence, as beings in this world, to look out for one another, especially those that may or may not have the ability to do so, protecting themselves. And so one of the things that I think about, of course, is like you're saying, a lot of these come from stories of women, and these women are the heroes or heroes, in these stories. And I think that's something that we need to look at a little bit more as far as Indigenous peoples. For a lot of our violence, a lot of these things has been brought to us, has been instilled into us and normalized, unfortunately, in a lot of colonial ways and in a genocidal way. And so I think this is something that you're doing is a very, very, it's a tough thing to approach, but you're taking it head on. And the best way to do it is to really talk about these things, to get them out into the open, and to be able to not only, yes, talk about the terrible things, but also talk about the positive things, that we are able to overcome them, that we are still here, that we still have our families intact, hopefully, that we have the ability to continue forward and even also advocate for others in the future. And so hopefully we're creating a better future, and especially you, by telling these stories, by advocating for not only our women, but also our youth and our future generations. And again, I'll include men as well, because we have a responsibility just as much as our women do to try to look out for themselves, look out for each other, and be better communities. And so thank you so much for all of that. I definitely admire the ability of your skillful pen. And of course, on your website, I think it's very cool that you talk about some really cool, your list of perfect movies. I see some really, really fun titles in here, some of which I also agree with entirely. And I just want to hear your take on some of your top ones. I mean, Moonlight, of course, and Pride and Prejudice, such huge, impactful movies that have such a hard topic to talk about, but they approach it in a very eloquent way, as I think you're doing a very good job of reiterating in your own way. But why, which one of these, would you like to talk about, and why? Why is it your favorite?
I walked out of the theater from Moonlight, and I turned to my dad and I said, that's exactly the type of movie that I want to make. Of course, similar to our community, not enough content on, what it means and how you grow up and how hard it can be to grow up, Black and gay. And Moonlight was able to approach the character of Chiron with such heart and bring such humanity to that character, in ways that are often denied to characters, and that's something that I identify with, of course, and have lived seeing so many stereotypes, and I think that's kind of the bridge that we're at in terms of representation, is kind of humanizing our Native characters. going beyond stereotypes and asking what comes next. Because for so long, so much of that fight has been like, we're still here, we still exist. I'm very deeply interested in kind of, yeah, of course we exist, we're still here. But what comes next? What's the story about like that, Native lawyer? What's the story about that two-spirit youth, trying to find who they are in the world? And I think that that's super interesting and something I just love so much in Moonlight, so skillfully written and directed by Barry Jenkins. And Pride and Prejudice, I've probably seen the most out of all the movies in the world. It's got like infinite rewatchability to me. And like I love the book. But I think there's just it's got beautiful cinematography. Joe Wright in his film Atonement also has a 4-minute tracking scene with thousands and thousands of extras. And it's just like, how do you even make that happen? Like, how is that possible? So I think, it's just like this base story of that is just so incredibly impactful in the way that it is told. And I think that, I dream of a future. I know the New York Times called like this recent boom of like, native TV shows, like a micro niche. And, I long for the days when we are no longer like a micro niche. Like it's just a movie, it's just a story. But like, look, it's native characters, but they're just humans. I think that that's where we're headed. And I think, it's so exciting.
For any youth watching, perhaps, do you have any advice for the youth if they want to follow in your footsteps and become involved in the cinema or filmmaking as well?
Yes, definitely. I mean, it gets easier year by year, month by month, week by week. There's so much available online even. As a writer, what I can say is the most helpful thing to you is to watch as many good movies as possible. But then also a lot of scripts are available online. If you wanted to read the script for Moonlight, just type in Moonlight script PDF and like it'll come up. And I think
you could print it, it'll be this big.
but that way you get to learn kind of like how people write on the page. And then I think, as much as you can, just try and make it happen. And for me, because I didn't have money to like make short films, that was always why I turned to writing in the same hand.
Wow.
But yeah, again, like your community is your best asset. Like ask your friends, like ask your dad to hold the camera, like ask your cousin, like you know what I mean? They're like, if you've got enough passion for it, you can, just build your own community. And I think that's the best thing about it.
Right. I definitely think you hit on some good points as far as like just the idea of like watching good films, first of all, but then taking a look at what the script looked like before they made it a magnificent piece of art, and I think that's so cool. Even like you're saying, just being able to try it yourself, try to recreate some of these scenes and see what it really takes, like the camera angles. And you pointed out a lot of key things in film as well, the atonement, the director, the films, of course, the tracking, even having huge scenes with like endless, no editing is I think is something that's amazing, that I find that it's very, very skillfully done. A lot of films definitely like are very artistic. A lot of these films that you have on your list here have amazing directors and writers, and I really admire a lot of their techniques. A lot of them have gems in them, so you have to watch them all. So yeah.
When you were, I kind of said in filmmaking for the Dark Winds, when you were screenwriting, when you were working with other native screenwriters, did you notice that it was like an easier environment, if you will, or just like a more like environment that you'd be used to like kind of like brainstorm together and conjure up ideas?
Yes, I was absolutely so stunned, but also so grateful that season 1, our staff writing team was entirely native. And I got a shout out, those fellow artists, fellow writers, Anthony Flores, Erica Tremblay, Billy Luther, Brazil Benali, and myself. So those were the writers in the room, accompanied by our showrunner, who was white, I will admit. But it was, I can remember Billy telling the story about logging into the Zoom room for the first time and just seeing, native face pop up after native face. Because as writers and creators, we've all been put in a place where we've been, tokenized or told to speak for the whole community. And there's just like no way to do that. There's, so many tribes, so many ways to be native. But the fact that we were all able to come together, I think definitely made it, a safer space to throw out ideas in. And when, someone said, hey, that's like off limits, you can't do that in this tribe, we understood what that meant also. And outsiders aren't gonna get that. So something I'm super grateful for in terms of having, my first, television writing room, that I was able to kind of dip my toe in alongside other Native writers. And with the exception of Anthony Flores, it was all of our first TV writing room. So we'd all come from independent film, making our own stuff, theater, documentary. So it was amazing also to get to learn and grow alongside that team on season 1.
Wow. That's so cool. Are you interested in working with a lot of these people in future projects, or is there something that you're allowed to talk about?
Oh, I mean, definitely. I mean, everyone, has such amazing viewpoints and visions and perspectives. I think that was another thing, definitely, because we also came from all over the United States. Billy and Rizal were both Dene. But, I, was coming from the Rocky Mountains. Anthony was, Paiute from Reno, and Erica was from, she's Seneca, like, so a little bit all over. And so I think getting to see that, difference also, and seeing what skills people brought was so fascinating. So there's definitely, of course, would love to work with them again. And, on those future projects, definitely have some, folks in mind for just in terms of like what that project is, what those sensibilities are. And of course, that's just all, again, everyone else, like, puts their friends in the room, like, we got to do that too. And that's, very exciting also to see on Reservation Dogs and Rutherford Falls, whose season 2s have just come out, getting to build that and grow bigger and have mentorship in room and get people to, be able to level up, which is exciting.
Yes, definitely. I think we could all definitely give each other a good momentum if we all say each other's names in these spaces the way you are, especially as far as we uphold each other and appreciate each other's art and our visions, and share that abroad, and let other people know that you're not the only one. Yes, I'm amazing, but also there are others that are amazing as well. So we appreciate all that you've done for us. We definitely think that you have so much to talk about, so much to share, so much art to be told, so many stories that have yet to be told still. I'm excited for all of them. We're going to give our audience just a reminder, if you haven't done so already, to please check the link, get signed in for the raffle at the end of the session, and then we'll have a moment also to give her a moment to reflect. We'll give her a fast 5 in a bit, and then we'll also have a few more questions. So just a quick reminder, we're going to ask her about a couple of the other projects that you have on your website when you talk about Sweetness of the Blood, which is a continuation of Dogwood. And to me, I'm curious, like, was that something that you had already kind of like mapped out, or what was something that kind of came along thereafter? What was that process like for you?
Yes, so I had written Sweetness of the Blood first.
Oh, really?
Yes, I had written it first, and that's the script. That's the psychological thriller / horror that was named on the Indigenous list last year, and was very much, when I set out to write it, an investigation of what scares me most in this world. So cobbled together a lot of life experience. The main character in Sweetness of the Blood is a woman who's dealing with early onset dementia. And one of my first jobs out of high school was I worked in an old folks home, and I worked from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. Specifically in the hallway that got locked up at night, where the patients with memory care issues slept. So I have a lot of crazy stories from that, but was able to kind of, reckon with those thoughts and put that in a screenplay as, some type of like catharsis, and, had all these thoughts knocking around in my brain. And then with that finished screenplay, I was just still so enamored with and still so obsessed with the characters. So Dogwood is actually a prequel I wrote later that's set 25 years before the events of Sweetness of the Blood. So it was also a chance to live, be, and understand those characters more. but also operate as kind of like a proof of concept of kind of, you know, even the fact that like you can shoot in rural Montana, you can shoot on the reservation, and kind of as a big picture goal to be able to bring jobs back to my community is something that, you know, is such a big hope and a goal also. So wanting to have it operate on like multiple levels in the same way.
Mm. Well, I think that's awesome. You definitely incorporate as many of the job titles as you can to Indigenous folks, and I think that's something that we take for granted. Even just saying that, there are so many different types of jobs that you can pursue within the film industry. If you don't want to be on the main in the spotlight, if you feel more comfortable behind the scenes, if you are tech savvy, if you like cameras, if you like sound, if you like all of these things such as lighting and movie magic, that's what I call it. You know, all of these things make our stories come to life. And I think that's so cool that you definitely embrace the idea of really incorporating as much as you can, even especially as accepting volunteer work from family and donations, especially that does help. You know, it goes miles. You know, we can't say enough how much the support from your community, and of course, when you get these opportunities to have work that is kind of allotted to you, if you will, it goes a long way. It speaks volumes, especially when you get to the end and you're like, oh man, that was such a big project, something hard that we took on, but it was worth it. It was well worth it, and I think everybody involved definitely also sees the value in that, and I think that's so cool. There's a lot of drama all across our storylines. Would you see yourself, I think you mentioned it before, talking about Native futurism, having a more idealistic vision of our future. Is there anything that you would like to see more immediately for our communities, just not in the sense of movies and writing and such, but just in general? Is there something that you would like to see happen within your community more often, or be more embraced? Is that something that you could see that are effects of your films, you know, people becoming more aware of these topics and these subjects, such as, for instance, in Dogwood, they definitely have somebody trying to reconnect, trying to become a part of their community, trying to pick up these traditional teachings again. Is there something particular that you are adamant about that you would really like people to see picked up?
Yeah, I mean, Dogwood also very much deals in kind of plant medicines and knowledge. I think, of course, that's always so important, but on like a grander, bigger scale, when you write a story, there's always an emotional arc, and that's usually going, I mean, via history and the way that we all tell stories, you know, is it going to be tragic or is it going to be hopeful? And so I am definitely a person who, you know, how are we able to find healing? How are we investigating that questions? How are we actively working towards it? You know, of course, you know, as Native communities, we've had so much wrong perpetuated against us via genocide, colonization, assimilation, the list goes on and on. You know, how do we heal? The answer is just so esoteric. Like, how do you know how to heal? It's something that we were forcibly, like that knowledge was forcibly taken from us. But on a story perspective, you've got to make healing happen in a feature film on a page in a matter of 120 pages. So it's something I've got to think about constantly. And how do you build that emotional arc? How does that feel fruitful? How does that bring catharsis to you? I think, you know, of course, across the nation, we're all dealing with questions of kind of, you know, what comes next? How do you find healing? On all sorts of scales and all sorts of ways. So that's what I'll say. You guys are muted.
Kind of going back to when you were screenwriting with other Native screenwriters, was part of the process being able to pick out the cast, or is that like the further up ahead of production? Or is that something that you were all able to do?
So we were all, I don't know how classical this is, but everyone in the room was also a director for season 1. So our showrunner was very giving in that we were able to watch a lot of those audition tapes, which was a ton of fun. Casting is such a fun part of the process. And, you know, I give actors absolutely all the kudos in the world because that is so difficult. Because as a writer and director, I don't have to take that personally. If someone doesn't like something, I can say, oh, that's like the screenplay they don't like. That's not me. But as an actor, there's like no facade between those things. But you know, when people are able to have the right instincts, when they've got the right timing, and as a writer, you're able to be like, oh, aha, like they get it. They understand the character. It's like, oh, thank God. Like it's a breath of fresh air and such an exciting part of the process. So I don't think any of our voices necessarily had much sway. But it was definitely fun to see that process in action.
Very good. I think you definitely like talk about some fun things that you would encounter in film and in acting, and things that not a lot of folks are aware of. So this is really insightful for a lot of folks, especially for me, I think, to be reminded of these things and to talk about them in a light way. You know, hindsight's 2020. When you're in the moment, it's a lot different. But yeah, sure. But definitely, I think you definitely point out something, or almost indirectly, just by taking it on yourself, by filling these roles yourself, by being the director, the writer, sometimes the costume production, set designer, all of these things. You know, you really have to create your vision and see it through. And I think that's one of the things that unfortunately sometimes we as writers, even, you might have to let go of between the process of the, you know, the written story and the end product. You know, sometimes things get changed, sometimes get modified. But for you are also responsible for the origination. So you have the ability to be flexible, to be, you know, to be able to make adjustments and things like that. I think that's so cool. But also as the final product comes to fruition, you have the ultimate say of making sure that it is true to your word and true to the story and what we feel like we want to convey. Something that we've definitely struggled with in Hollywood and media forever, having other people telling our stories for us. And I think it's about time, high time, that we have Indigenous people telling our stories for ourselves. And then even more so, beautiful women, young women telling our stories, to be able to get that across to much more bigger audiences. Because it's one thing for a man to say, oh yeah, we got to start paying attention. But of course, when women command the stage and command the attention and command the solutions, you know, we aren't just addressing issues here, we are finding solutions. And I think that's one of the things that you're making space for and making headway, major headway, especially as we have so many people that to now look up to an individual like yourself that is very well making waves, making changes, and just doing what you feel is in your heart, is following that heart, following that path, and making sure that you do things in a good way. So thank you very much for all that you've done. I think it's now we're going to take a moment for our Fast Five, and then we'll get to our drawing. Make sure you don't let me skip out on this raffle. So Fast Five is basically a simple thing that we do. We just have 5 questions, and then you give us an answer off the top of your head. It might be deep, might be very simple, one word, and it's okay. And
just don't think about it too much.
We just need to pick your brain a little bit more before we let you go. All right, so Man's going to take the first 3, and I'll take the last 2.
Given that we're a Native organization, what's your favorite Native film? Either one that you've created or one that you've seen growing up, or what's your favorite?
That's so hard. Well, and I think because I'm also like I get so excited about like what's coming next, because I know people who are like making movies right now. I'll say, yeah, they're in the future. I am so excited to see Billy Luther and Erica Tremblay's feature debuts. They're currently editing / creating them, and it was such a pleasure being in Dark Winds season 1. So want to plug those movies. Keep an eye out. They're both absolutely formidable, and they'll be, you know, coming out, which is so fun. They're already my favorite. They're already my favorite.
So when you're working or when you're getting in your creative mode, what would be on your iTunes playlist, or what artist or genre particularly dominates the playlist?
I've got this bad habit of I only relate to music in terms of movies. So I like don't save full albums, and I'll play a game with myself, or like when I listen to a song, I'm like, at what page in a screenplay is this going to come on? So you know, I can't like turn off the director brain. So I listen to a lot of like folk pop, indie singer songwriter. But I think that, oh man, it depends, because I make playlists for each of my different projects to put on. So they're all different as a part of kind of like the process of like feeling the tone out of a project. So that's what I'll say. It's a little all over the place.
No worries. Out of all the places you've been and like all the venues you worked at, which location is your favorite for creating film?
My home on the Blackfeet Nation. It's definitely the most beautiful place in the lower 48. I think you could make an argument for Alaska or Hawaii. But yeah, the mountains around Glacier National Park, are just like as good as it gets.
Right.
Oh, wow.
Is that three?
Oh, that was you.
Okay, my apologies. So my favorite thing to know about, you wouldn't guess this, but I'm a huge foodie. I love food. But what is your favorite dish, traditional or non-traditional, either from your community or from your travels abroad? What is your favorite dish?
I am also somewhat of a foodie. I absolutely love cooking. That's like my big hobby. So like I cook my own sourdough bread. I just made a carrot cake. I think like if I were stranded on a desert island and only had like one food to eat for the rest of my life, it would probably be a Penang curry from Thailand.
What? Oh my gosh, that actually sounds really awesome. And the notion that somebody making that like home cooked, for you specifically would be amazing as well. I think that's awesome. All righty, so this one is kind of a little more round the way. If you could work with any director or actor now or then, who would you work with?
I mean, there's just so much great native talent like out and making and doing things right now. There's so many amazing directors. I think the number one person that I look to in the industry is definitely Barry Jenkins. So I'll lock in with my Moonlight answer. Everything that he touches is absolute gold. He seems like a very wonderful, nice person. So that's what I'll say.
Yeah, well, it's good. We'll put that out in the world. We'll see if it bounces back, and we can have some people spitball that for a while. We'll never know what can come of this. So again, we thank you so much for your time this evening. We're going to take a moment. If you can, just reach forward. I need you to touch this wheel of names. Oops. Oh my gosh. I don't know if you can see it.
I can.
Reach forward and touch it. There you go. Reach and okay. It's spinning, believe it or not.
I believe.
Our green screen.
Rico, come back.
All right.
Michael White Eagle.
All right.
And that's White Eagle with 2 E's. So that's not me.
Michael White Eagle, thank you for watching and joining us. Of course, again, thank you, of course, to Maya Rose Dittloff for sharing this evening with us and sharing your stories. We appreciate all that you are doing, all of your talent and skills. Would you like to share your Facebook or your Instagram or websites, whatever you want to share to let the people know where we can keep an eye on what you're doing next?
Yeah, I'm not much for social media, but I do have a website that I keep updated. It's just my name, mayaroseditloff.com. But so excited to be here. I think if I could leave on like one final note, I was just on a call with Chris Eyre, and his advice out to the world to put in was don't be afraid to make mistakes. And I think that's so useful in life. Of course, we're all afraid of appearing foolish or not saying the right thing or doing the right thing. And as someone that creates content, it's so important to remember, we're all on a journey. We're all just along for that ride. So don't be afraid of making mistakes. And it's been great talking with you guys today. I was just in the Twin Cities this past weekend. I just missed you guys, but it was grateful. I was, happy to be there. It was very humid, so humid, but great to, be back for a little bit. My dad grew up in Wisconsin, so partially from Wisconsin.
Oh, cool. Small world. Right on.
Well, thank you, Maya. And that's it from us from the Clan office, the Cultural Language Arts Network. We'll see you next week. Thank you.